Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Note the Past. In fact, this is number 10, and I'm so excited to be joined once again with my son in law, Brad Langford. You may recall that Brad was on our first podcast that was launched last April, so it's great to have him back. We're going to be talking about debut albums, which is a topic he and I have chatted about for a number of years, given our long-standing interest in rock and roll. As you know, rock and roll has a ton of different derivatives, alternative rock, heavy metal, folk rock, etc. And you'll hear some of that in some of the choices that we've made for you to listen to today. But what we've done is essentially narrow it down to 5 debut albums for both of us. And this is a daunting task. By way of example, Rolling Stone magazine has their top 100 debut albums. Can you imagine trying to narrow that down? Our research is really based on our own experience, listening to interviews from past band members, as well as current band members, and just listening to music critics and reading other kinds of online information about these albums. We are by no means experts. We're here to have fun and simply for the love and joy for this music that has been so important to us in the past. So if you'd like to click on the Note the Past icon in the bottom right-hand corner and let us know what you think of these debut choices that we've made, and make any comments about choices that might be of interest to you that were important to your experience growing up. But Bradley, do you have anything else before we just sort of launch right in?
Yeah, no, let's do this.
Okay, let's do it. So here's the format that we're going to be using. And we are going to include debut albums, and there they are. So we're going to go from number 5 to number 1 in descending order. And I'm going to start first. And my first choice is, drum roll please, The Doors. Just a wonderful transformational album that came out in January of 1967. The Doors were a band that was formed in 1965, and you can see the 4 members here. Certainly the frontman, Jim Morrison, Ray Manzarek, who was the keyboardist and really set that wonderful jazzy riff and tone for the Doors sound over the years. Robbie Krieger, the guitar player. Incidentally, Robbie was a student at Menlo College up here in Atherton, California for a period of time. So we have that kind of cool connection. And then John Densmore on drums. I was a junior in high school when this came out at Menlo Atherton High School, and it just blew my socks off because right about that time, we were going through the transition from top 40 hit radio on the AM dial, and some underground FM stations were beginning to emerge, like KMPX, that was founded by Tom and Rachel Donahue up here in San Francisco. And they were able to play these long cuts. But on AM radio, they had a fairly rigid stricture around 3-minute song length. And so for the Doors to be able to have their hit song, Light My Fire, play on the radio, they had to cut out the solo, the guitar and the organ solo in the middle of it, and reduce it to 3 minutes, which sort of chopped the song up, but it got a lot of AM airplay. And then certainly because of the acclaim for that hit, a number of stations began to play the entire song, and it was covered by those underground radio stations that I mentioned. The hit tracks were Break On Through to the Other Side. We all remember that one. Crystal Ship, one of my favorites, The End, and certainly Light My Fire that I just mentioned. I highly recommend that you go on Google or YouTube and watch Rick Beato's interview with the 2 remaining members of the Doors, John Densmore and Robbie Krieger. It is just a fascinating history of the band, how songs were crafted, how they were recorded. In fact, those two guys play a little of those songs during the recording. One last anecdote that I will leave you with is that, how do I want to put this? The Ed Sullivan Show in the early and the mid 60s was really a place where you wanted to get invited to be able to show your music chops. The Beatles did that back in 1964, and the Doors were invited to play, and they were asked to play their hit Light My Fire. Well, there was one lyric in there that Ed Sullivan and the producers asked that they changed, and that lyric was, "Girl, we can't get much. Girl, you can't get much. Geez, Chris. Girl, you can't get much higher." And so they agreed that they would do that. But in fact, when it came time to record the song, they said, forget it. And they just played the whole song. At the end of the song, Ed and the producers came over and said, "You will never play on the Ed Sullivan Show again." And of course, Jim Morrison, being the irreverent guy that he was, basically said, "Hey, we just played the Sullivan Show." I think it's a kind of a funny little tidbit that really talks and speaks to the popularity and the confidence that the band was beginning to form at that time. Jim died at age 27 in 1971. And many of you have no doubt heard about the Club 27 group of artists who actually passed away at the age of 27. In addition to Jim, there was Janis Joplin, Brian Jones of the Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and Jim Morrison's girlfriend, Pamela Corsone, died a couple of years later at the age of 27 as well. Kind of spooky, kind of weird stuff. But the Doors were a transformational, iconic band, and they come in on my group at number 5. Okay, Bradley, you ready?
Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, that's a cool choice. I definitely like that. Yeah, we just played Ed Sullivan. I like the rock star vibe that he has. You know me, Chris. I like a little bit of attitude in my music. So yeah, that's a good choice. But yeah, I'm ready for my number 5.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to go with Pearl Jam's debut album 10. This came out, I believe it was September of 1991. So yeah, I was a senior in college when this came out, and this, of course, being one of the the big four grunge bands of the early 90s, along with Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. It's kind of my story with this one, how I found this one out. So yeah, so it came out in September, but it came in totally under the radar. No one had ever heard of them. Now, I think, Chris, you've seen me wear T-shirts over the years. Waterloo Records. It's one of my favorite record stores ever. It's in Austin, and cool thing about them, when you walk in the place, along the back wall, they have a staff recommendations section. So it could be, CDs, albums, books, movies, DVDs, whatever it is they're selling. They're all in the back on each one individually on little shelves staggered throughout the back wall. And underneath each shelf, there's a thumbtacked, handwritten note on an index card from the staff at Waterloo. And they have a really great, knowledgeable staff. They know about everything in the place. They're really up on their stuff. And so every time I'd go into Waterloo, I'd go check out the back wall because I'm always looking for something different. And saw this, and I don't remember exactly what the card said, but it started off with, "Hey, this is new band Pearl Jam, or another band from Seattle like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana." Describe the music a little bit. But the thing that resonated with me, so I remember I saw this is probably like in October, November of 91, a month or two after the album came out. And it said, Pearl Jam was here over the summer, played such and such, small club, and they went over great. They're going to be here again at this other, small club in December. And then the last line of this handwritten index card said, "Catch them if you can in December, because these guys will never play a venue this small ever again."
Wow.
And yeah, and sure enough, like, whoever wrote the card was right. Very prophetic. A good, maybe 2 to 3 months later, if they're playing Saturday Night Live, Letterman, Eddie Vedder's on the cover of Time magazine. and they're off to the races. And this album, is double-digit platinum. And this kicked off, what's now about to hit 35 years of a global success, selling out arenas and stadiums all over the world. And it all started off with this album, kind of the key singles on it being Alive, Even Flow, and Jeremy, kind of deep cuts that I really like. Porch, it's a nice, rockin' song that they played on SNL and just tore the place up. And the last song on it, called Release, it's a really, really cool, ballad that builds over the course of its song. And a little tidbit on that, and I've heard this over the years, that Release has become a very highly requested song, or played song rather, at weddings and funerals. So it kind of meets that emotional part in both both sides of those types of events. So anyway, killer album all the way through, and they're still going strong, and that's my number 5.
Well, Release, as you know, is one of my favorite songs. I just think, is that Mike McCready playing guitar at the end? It's just phenomenal.
Yes.
Just, just the phenomenal, and Eddie doing his woo, it's just a great way to end the album, and very, very powerful song. I know they've been a big band for you. How many times do you think you've seen them at this point?
Probably 6 or 7, something like that. They're kind of sporadic with their touring. Remember that they had the big Ticketmaster drama in the mid '90s. They were one of the first to kind of fight against surcharges and all that. So they were, they're hit and miss. They're not road warriors like a lot of bands. But I still have had the chance to see them quite a few times.
Yeah, great choice.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to number 4. And coming in at this position for me is Tiger Lily by Natalie Merchant. Just a beautiful album, full of meaning. Her vocals will just blow you away if you listen to it, or if you've listened to it already. Natalie, as many of you may know, was in the 10,000 Maniacs from 1981 to 1993. In fact, she was 17 years old when she replaced the lead singer. And the Maniacs were a great band. They had a number of songs that charted, I think number 4 in the top 50 during their heyday. And in fact, their MTV Unplugged is one of the best music videos that I've ever seen. They play an entire album, and the interplay and the love and the emotion between Natalie and the Maniacs, which turned out to be their last performance, because that album was recorded and Natalie left the band before it was actually released. But it's just a wonderful album. Let me also let you know that the main tracks on that, and all of the tracks are very good, but a number of the tracks that really stand out on that are Carnival, Wonder, Phoenix, which was written for River Phoenix, just to name a few. And frankly, our family fell in love with this album. It came out in '95. And it was also at a time when our daughter, Annie, came out. And the song Wonder had these lyrics in it that really resonated with us, and have been important to us over the decades. And it goes like this. By the way, I'm huge on lyrics, so I'm going to have to throw lyrics in periodically, because I love the lyrics almost as much as I love the music. But this particular lyric said, "Know this child will be gifted with love, with patience, and with faith. She will make her own way." And in fact, that's what's happened. And it's just a very important sentiment. The album is fantastic. Natalie went on to publish and record and release a number of great albums, but this is one that really sticks out to me and comes in at number 4.
Yeah, you'd actually think, especially those of you who are listening or watching this, that know me and my tastes. Believe it or not, I'm actually a really big fan of this album, because this is definitely not in my my wheelhouse. But when I first started dating Jess, and then getting to know your family, Chris, that this album was front and center. around that time. So yeah, there's this album resonates with me too. I think it's really good, especially that song "My Beloved Wife" that's on there. Reminds me a lot of my dad, and mom, who had passed away, are also around the time that this album came out. So yeah, so this one actually gets a thumbs up for me, and definitely goes against type of the kind of stuff I listen to. So good choice on this one.
Yeah, the difference that we have in music, obviously, it's great to have you come in and be a strong supporter, frankly, of the last two. And I certainly am of Pearl Jam. One last interesting point was at the time this album was made in 94 and it came out in 95, John Landau was her manager, who everyone we know of the manager association with Bruce Springsteen. So I thought that was pretty cool. So we ready to move on to your number 4?
Yeah, let's go.
All right.
Okay, so mine. All right, so I'm going with the Black Crowes debut album called "Shake Your Moneymaker." Came out around like summer of 1990. No, not as in depth the story as I had for Pearl Jam. This was just a simple case of heard a couple songs on the radio. I think it was one of their first singles, either "Twice as Hard" or "Jealous Again," which were two of the hits. In addition to "She Talks to Angels" and their cover of "Hard to Handle." A lot of what drew me to this, and I started doing this kind of like late high school when I started when I kind of learned myself personally, just the radio and MTV bored me. And to this day, I still always look for new things. And a lot of how I'll determine whether or not I'll just try something out and buy it kind of unheard is what the band looks like on the front or back album cover, and so you look at these guys, they just look like rock stars, right? Just long hair. They look, like they probably got a couple bottles of booze sitting behind them. And so I, just went ahead and just took a chance on the album based on that. And it was a home run. This is a pretty easy album to like. It's very kind of early 70s Stones, a little bit of Skinner, a little bit of Allman Brothers. And really, it just that kind of simple. This album to me represents just the true kind of visceral joy that I get from music. Great frontman, Chris Robinson, probably either him or Sammy Hagar is not anywhere on this list, but has my favorite singing voice of all time. And caught them on this tour and have seen them a number of times. Actually, most recently, they did a 30-year anniversary celebration of this album where they played it all the way through in its entirety, in addition to other songs. And I caught that one with Uncle Ray.
How fun.
A couple years back. It was cool hearing it just all the way through. And it holds up live. Well, it's even better live, but it sounds great on record. So great way to start off their career. So that's it's my number 4, the Black Crowes.
Oh, that's great. And you recall that you and I went to see Chris Robinson and his band at the time when he was on a break from the Black Crowes at Slim's, which was Boss Gag's little nightclub in San Francisco. And that was
exactly.
That was a lot of fun, long time ago. Okay, now we're heading down to number 1, and we're going to start with number 3 right here. And my third one is the Counting Crows and their album, their debut album, August and Everything After. What an incredible album and gift of songs. The lead singer and really the front man for this band, Adam Duritz, wow, what a voice, what a poet. His lyrics have so much meaning, and they are heart-wrenching at times. I'm going to share one with you in just a moment, but they were a San Francisco Bay Area band, and they formed in 1993. And interestingly, the name Counting Crows, because it's always fun sometimes when you will see, like the Black Crowes that Brad just talked about, their debut album is the name of their band. The Doors' debut album was the name of their band. Well, this is Counting Crows. And they got this from a book called One for Sorrow. And it was really all about sort of magpies that are in the crow bird genre. And that's how they came up with the name. The other interesting thing about this cover is you'll see words all over the cover. And these are actually the lyrics for the song August and Everything After. That song didn't make the album, which I I thought it was very interesting, but it was kind of cool to see the album design come out like that. The tracks, there's probably not a bad track on the entire album, from Round Here, Perfect Blue Buildings, Omaha, Rain King. I'm not going to name them all. Mr. Jones. There's just wonderful tracks that have so much meaning for anyone who listens, because you can interpret the lyrics in so many different ways. And I'm going to give you one lyric from Round Here, which is just beautiful. Step out the front door like a ghost into the fog, where no one knows the contrast of white on white. And in between the moon and you, the angels get a better view of the crumbling difference between wrong and right. How beautiful is that? It gives me goosebumps just talking about it. The album did do well. It actually it ranked pretty high on the Billboard 200, and Rolling Stone actually clocked it in at number 67 of their top 100 albums back in 2019. So it went on to be 7 times platinum. And I think I've shared with you, Bradley, that at the time of its release, it was the fastest selling album, even eclipsing Nirvana's Nevermind. So pretty rarefied air indeed. And finally, while it was on this album, but I know you're a huge Counting Crows fan as well, Your Wedding Dance was a Long December, a wonderful, wonderful Counting Crows song. So that's my album clocking in at number 3.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you just teased that there, Chris. Yeah, I'm a fan also. They weren't on my radar at the time, but again, similar to Tiger Lily, when I first started, coming around the family, yeah, this was also in heavy rotation. And I've even taken the baton since then, and I continue to get new stuff as it comes out from the Counting Crows. I wish they'd put stuff out more frequently than they do. But yeah, this is a solid debut for sure.
Great. So there are a couple that we agree on. Here we go.
Absolutely.
Here we go.
Okay, probably have some difference here, I would think, but yeah, this is my number 3. So Guns N' Roses with Appetite for Destruction came out around the summer of 1987. So I was senior in high school when this came out. Kind of how I discovered them, a little bit similar to the Black Crowes, and that I took a chance based on the way the band looked on the back of the album cover. But first got on my radar, and actually a lot of people's radar. I think it's kind of well documented. I have a similar story to a few million people on this one. But Chris, I'm not sure how much of an MTV watcher you were back in the day, but definitely not this show. But on Saturday nights, like late night, like around like 11 p.m., they had a like 2 or 3 hour show every week called Headbangers Ball, and it just focused on my kind of stuff, that hard rock and heavy metal, and they play established bands as well as new bands, and they play all sorts of stuff. And I discovered quite a few things through that channel, because the executives at MTV basically let the producers of Headbangers Ball alone and allowed them just to play whatever it was they wanted. And Guns N' Roses being signed to Geffen Records, they really wanted to push the band, but during the day at that time, it's all kind of Madonna and Prince and George Michael and Michael Jackson. So MTV wasn't really giving it any airtime, but the Headbangers Ball folks liked it, and they just put it on midnight, 1 a.m. And the old school switchboards, as they say, lit up, and it started getting a lot of requests. And then started getting woven into the regular daytime, mainstream times for MTV programming, and the record just took off. So I went and bought it just based on that first video, "Welcome to the Jungle," which just hit me like a ton of bricks when it came out. Certainly by that time, 87, I think so much of music had gotten so lousy. Certainly with that 80s production, drum machines and synthesizer and all that, and really highly polished stuff. Guns N' Roses was a throwback, kind of a unique mix. Again, kind of referencing 70s Stones, 70s Aerosmith, a little bit of a punk vibe in there as well, and just created their own kind of alchemy that really set themselves apart from anybody. And I think of actually the 5 albums I have on here, this is the biggest selling, at least domestically. I think it sits around 18 million copies,
That's
and like
amazing.
like over 30 million globally. And big hits on this one. Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine is what really broke them big. Also Paradise City, but Night Train, It's So Easy, just great songs all the way around. An incredible live band. Certainly when they'd show up, I know they had issues with Axl Rose at the time for a number of years making it on time, but when they showed up, they delivered, and this was the album that really launched them, and it's just phenomenal. And as rock and roll a band as there is out there. So that's my number 3, Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses.
That's incredible. And I know you've always been a fan. And that song, Sweet Child of Mine, oh my God, it's almost emblazoned in my head because, my oldest daughters were so huge fans of Guns N' Roses during that time. It's just a great choice. And really, the artwork, if you look at this, it's so indicative of you as well.
Right. Right.
I mean, the skeletons and everything in your family, what you do for Halloween and your Christmas cards. I mean, just a wonderful choice. Good job.
Thank you.
All right. Now we're coming down to number 2. And for me, I'm going with Bruce's Greetings from Asbury Park. An incredible album that came out in 1973. And I'm not going to go through all of Bruce's history. There's so much material that you can read or watch or listen to about him. He's just phenomenal, and always have been a big fan. Our family's always been a big fan of not only this album, but basically the majority of his albums. This was a relatively unknown album, and a lot of people went back to it after Bruce really made it big, after being on the cover of Time magazine and other famous media sources. But again, as I said, he was signed to Columbia Records, and that was Dylan's label as well. And he submitted Greetings as his debut album, and the label, particularly the president, Clive Davis, said no, and they rejected it because the main reason was it didn't have a hit single. And remember, we were still in that throes of the transition from top 40 hit radio to album-oriented rock. Incidentally, if you want to know more about that transition, you can go back and watch my second podcast with Ben Fong Torres, the music editor of Rolling Stone magazine back in the day, where we go into much detail and build on his book, The Hits Just Keep On Coming. But it was relatively unknown, and they rejected it. And Bruce went back and wrote 2 songs in a short period of time, Blinded by the Light, which was subsequently covered and made a hit by Manfred Mann, and Spirit in the Night. And those were the hits that really caused Clive Davis and Columbia Records to accept the debut album and actually put it out. Interestingly, because he had to go back and record those two songs, there were 2 members of the band who were unavailable. David Sanchez, the beautiful, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing his name right, David Sanchez, the beautiful piano player on those early albums, and Gary W. Talent, the bass player. They weren't available for those 2 songs, but who was available and became obviously a very important part of the E Street Band was Clarence Clemons. So that was the beginning of Clarence's tenure, R.I.P., in the E Street Band with Bruce. Key tracks on that album are Blinded by the Light that I mentioned, Growing Up, which is just a wonderful song. One time he played it, and you can go on YouTube and watch it. His parents are in the audience, and he's singing to them about growing up. It's fantastic. Lost in the Flood, which is a family favorite, and the song For You. And frankly, that's the lyric I'd like to share with you right now. Well, crawl into my ambulance. Your pulse is getting weak. Oh, reveal yourself all now to me, girl, while you've got the strength to speak. Because they're waiting for you at Bellevue with their oxygen masks. But I could give it all to you if only you could ask. God, the guy's a poet. And this was one of his earliest forays into poetry. And it was just wonderful. Rolling Stone actually came in and named it number 379 on its all-time albums, and it named it as number 37 on their debut album. So it was a great, wonderful outing and debut for Bruce, and I encourage any of you who have not spent time with it to go back and check it out.
Yeah, this is a cool album. Actually, as far as because I have all of his albums, even the stuff for the past 20 years or whatever. And this one's close to the top for me. Actually, I was late to the Springsteen party. I think kind of going back just in the 80s, he just didn't click with me at all. And 70s, I just wasn't familiar with it. But then my friend Rusty in around the mid 90s was like, no, you got to check this out. And this is one that he played quite a bit. And then obviously being a big part of your family. But yeah, as far as Bruce's albums go, yeah, this one's near the top for me. And speaking of which, they've covered it live a bunch of times. Pearl Jam will do Growing Up as part of their sets when they're letting loose towards the end of the show. So yeah, thumbs up for me on this one too.
Yeah, no, it's no question a great album. And if you haven't listened to it. And frankly, if you haven't gone to see Bruce live, wherever you live, next time he's out, make it a priority because he still puts on a phenomenal show. Okay, you ready for number one? Whoops, sorry, we've got your number two. Your number
yep.
two.
still at number two here, and I'm going to go with Boston's self-titled debut. Came out early, 1976. It's been out a while. It's funny, actually. This goes against the opposite of what I was just saying about what I didn't like about music in the 80s. This album is very crisp and clean sounding. It's almost perfect in the way it's recorded, but it still totally has that rock edge. Great heavy guitar riffs, but also really it's very well sung, well played, catchy songs. A lot of that's because Boston, it's really one person, even though, when they went on tour, they had a band, and yes, he has a singer and all that. It's not like Prince or Dave Grohl at Foo Fighters, whose, early records, he did it all himself. But Boston is largely the brainchild of a guy named Tom Schultz, and he's a graduate of MIT. So it's a super smart guy, and he even developed his own guitar pedal, a distortion overdrive pedal called the Rockman, which is still in use today, being used by Slash from Guns N' Roses. David Gilmour's used it, amongst others. But anyway, Tom Schultz just like literally in his basement created this Boston sound, and it's very unique if you ever heard it. As far as how I got into it, again, I was super young when it came out, but my sister Lisa, who was a big influence on me musically early on, she played this album constantly. So whether I was sneaking into a room to listen to her records when she wasn't around, or I would just hear it bleeding through my walls. This album was constantly played in the at least the upstairs at the Langford house, and also every song on this album's been on classic rock radio forever. So it's one of those rare albums that actually is kind of a greatest hits album unto itself. And but the big hits on this, More Than a Feeling, one of my favorite songs of all time, Peace of Mind, Long Time, Rock and Roll Band. It really is a flawlessly built and played and produced and sung record as I've ever heard, and really has a unique sound. And they really didn't do much more after this. That they had their follow-up album come out about 2 years later in 1978. And then there was an 8-year gap until 1986 when they released their third album, And while they put out some other stuff after that, the original singer left and he's passed, and it's just not the same. But to really get that quintessential, Boston sound, look no further than this debut coming in at number 2 on my list.
Well, that More Than a Feeling, what a song. And that guitar work at the end of that song is magnificent. And it just gives you a feeling of joy when you listen to it. You just can't help but feel happy and just move because it's got that kind of vibe to it. It's just a wonderful choice. So good selection there, Bradley. Now I think we can move on to number 1, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Let's do it.
And coming in at number 1, probably no surprise to anyone, was Neil Young's debut album, which was appropriately titled Neil Young. This album came out on his 23rd birthday on November 12th, 1968. And remember, again, this was going through that time where there was the transition from AM radio to FM long form radio, and a lot of the tracks on this album were actually picked up on AOR format FM stations. The album wasn't overly, I should say it wasn't reviewed very strongly when it came out. Neil had just left a tremendously successful run with Buffalo Springfield. He was with that band from 66 to 68. And they're really that representative group of the iconic folk rock scene that really developed, nurtured, and grew out of Southern California during that period of time. And he had left the band Buffalo Springfield before, but he came back, and after the final album, that each one of those members actually contributed songs mostly on their own. He left and he put together this solo debut album with his new manager, Elliot Roberts, with his new producer, David Briggs, and frankly, with Jack Nietzsche as well. And Jack was part of the Phil Spector Wall of Sound that put out all those wonderful hit records back in the late 50s, early 60s. But he was an arranger second to none. And Jack put together all the string arrangements on this song. In addition to Jack, Jimmy Messina from Buffalo Springfield played on this album, as did George Grantham from Poco, which was again, one of those folk rock groups that came out of Buffalo Springfield and a couple of other bands. But one other person that I want to mention, Carol Kay, two other people. Carol Kay played on this, and Carol was part of the Wrecking Crew, that group of artists that would go into session players that would go in and play with different groups. And she was a tremendous bassist. She played with the Beach Boys, and she ended up also contributing to Neil's debut album here. So the other person that I wanted to mention was Mary Clayton. She sings backup along with two or three other backup singers. Mary Clayton also sang backup on Gimme Shelter for the Rolling Stones. So kind of some neat connections when you see what happens with a number of these players. Anyway, the album was released in November of '68, and Neil hated it. In fact, there is a great YouTube documentary on why did Neil Young hate his debut album. It's so well done. You've got to check it out. But part of the reason why he hated it was because his label, Reprise Records, off Warner's, Reprise Records, decided to use some new technology that would allow you to play, long albums on both mono and stereo equipment. And the impact of that degraded the sound. And so you couldn't hear Neil's voice on a number of those tracks. And Neil and his producer, David Briggs, said to Reprise, forget it. It's not going to be released because it's not up to the standard, nor is it up to the original mixes that we did when we submitted the album. Well, Reprise gave in and said, okay, we'll take that technology off. Neil re-recorded a few of the songs, and it was subsequently re-released in 1969. As I said before, it didn't get great reviews, but it's still considered as one of the top must-hear albums in Neil's canon. And it's so unique because this album, every track on the album was an overdub, meaning that all of the instruments were overdubs. All of the vocals were overdubs. And in fact, in some cases, the vocals were done in different studios. And it became so complicated and so overwrought that Neil vowed that all subsequent albums, no, it's going to be raw, it's going to be live, and we're going to do the takes when we finish recording as a band, not individually, with very, very little overdubbing. And so it was a kind of a cool learning lesson for Neil to go through in this just magnificent debut album. Last point, when they did the re-release, they used this cover because they had a run out of the album stock on the other one, and they slapped Neil Young's name on the front of it. Frankly, I don't care for this cover. I like the original. And in fact, I have mine that I bought, if you can see it, somewhere in the mid 90s for $125. So I'm the proud owner of Neil Young's first album, and he comes in at #1 of my debut albums.
Yeah, well, and this wasn't the last time that Neil would have a run-in with with the record company. I think he's had quite a few of them. Yeah, this is a cool record. It's different. Yeah, for sure. He definitely went more raw and analog after this, but I think this album kind of set him up to be able to try different things throughout his career. So yeah, it's a cool album. Actually, and I have this up on the wall in my garage as well. So yeah, another good choice.
And if any of you are ever in San Carlos, California, be sure to contact us. You can go by and see Brad's garage. It's phenomenal. You've never seen so many album covers. And what about his knowledge in talking about all these albums? It's just phenomenal, the musical knowledge that he has and he brings to the table in these discussions. All right, you ready for your #1?
Yeah, let's go. All right, yes, my #1, probably no surprise to anybody that knows me that's listening to this. It's Van Halen 1, as it's called by the fans, came out around mid 1978. Yeah, it's funny. No real story to this one either. It was, again, I was young when it came out. I didn't actually own this album until a bunch of years later because I didn't really have money to buy albums at that point. But this album was all over the radio. And had, and then had friends that had it. It's kind of hard to put into words, but it all really comes down to Eddie Van Halen. It's very rare when an album comes out that either like invents a genre or introduces some new musical talent or just a way of, reimagining an instrument. And really not since Jimi Hendrix in the probably 66, 67 had a guitar player come out and made such an immediate impact to the instrument, and not just guitar, but songwriting and all that. And it really just stems from Eddie Van Halen in conjunction with, with his brother Alex, kind of anchoring down the rhythm of this band. A lot of people think of Eddie as, kind of the loud, squealy guitar solos and all that. But what's really overlooked is, he wrote all the music for them as well. So, would work with David Lee Roth and later Sammy Hagar on, on the melody lines, those kind of things, and support from bassist Michael Anthony on those background harmonies. But, where I think Eddie Van Halen is really underrated is as a songwriter. Van Halen just writes great songs, like no more evidence than on this debut. He just writes good, catchy, melodic, yet, rocking songs with good riffs, good musicianship, and again that guitar sound that that you cannot help but know it the second you hear it. And a lot of people know this, but even Michael Jackson tapped him. He's the one that plays guitar in that song "Beat It" from
Oh,
from
no kidding. I didn't know that.
from the mid '80s. That's Eddie playing the guitar. Big hits on this one. Running with the Devil, Ain't Talking About Love, first single, their cover of the Kinks song, You Really Got Me. Probably not so much a hit, even though on the radio before You Really Got Me, they play this 1.5-minute instrumental called Eruption, which, Chris, I'm pretty sure I've played this up. We've done music appreciation up in Arnold. I've played this one because, again, only 1.5 minutes, so I'm not gonna push you all too much on it, but it is just crazy ass guitar solo that was just picked up randomly by producer Ted Templeman while Eddie was noodling around in the studio before doing a take of a real song, and it just put it on the album, and it really introduced Eddie as the new guitar hero in town. And he has been frequently imitated and flat out copied, but again, just for the fast stuff like that you see, but without the attention to songwriting, which Eddie always paid. But that guitar solo Eruption, that's one of the most attempted songs by any budding guitar player to show how good their chops are. They'll play Eruption. And again, this has been a worldwide hit and launched Van Halen into years of arena and stadium sellouts. And it's just another one of those greatest hits albums onto itself. Just the personality and all that involved. Just hands down my favorite debut. It's probably my top 2 or 3 albums of all time, period. And that's where I'll end it. So Van Halen 1 is my favorite debut of all time.
Fantastic. And we've talked about this before, but I have emblazoned in my mind when Van Halen would play, and I think the song was Jump on MTV.
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie smiling with that unique guitar playing that he has. It's just incredible. He was an incredible guitar player, and great choice for your number 1 album. So there we have it. And we are back live. Can you believe we were able to narrow Rolling Stone's top 100 debut albums down to our 5? It was difficult. Had to leave a number off. The Beatles Please Me, Ricky Lee Jones, Lindsey Buckingham, Graham, John Lennon's first.
I had Foo Fighters debut, Black Sabbath's debut, which launched the first heavy metal album ever. And The Knack, believe it or not, was in contention for number 5, kind of right up until we turned on the cameras here. So tons of great debuts out there. So, but I think we got 10 good ones up there.
Yeah, well, I've really enjoyed doing this with you. Thank you so much, Bradley. Again, if you want to click on the Note the Past icon to subscribe and be notified of future podcasts, as well as comment on our top 5 and any additions that you'd like to add, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much for watching, not just this one, but other ones. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, please let me know. And Bradley, we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Keep on rocking.